Okay. We are live. Welcome. We're going to give it a couple of seconds and let people join. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today for L2B Aviation's Global Aviation News. Today, we're going to be talking about an increase in fee schedules for air navigation services in the Philippines. All flights will be impacted, including training flights conducted by pilot schools. Air carriers flying to and from the Philippines are advised to take into consideration the updated CAAP fees and charges. So Kerwin is going to take us through that today, and we'll learn more about how that's going to affect everybody. Kerwin Tan is the managing partner of Tan Hassani Counsels and our L2B aviation member in the Philippines. Prior to founding the firm and for most of his professional career, Kerwin worked at one of the biggest top-tier law offices in the country, handling all types of corporate and commercial transactions and related tax practice. Currently, he manages the firm with his partners and special counsels. He mainly focuses on corporate and commercial transactions, foreign investments, securities, and tax law. His experience includes handling transactions in banking, business process, outsourcing, construction, energy, IT, manufacturing, mining, real estate, and telecom. In particular, and as a specialized field, he heads the aviation law practice of the firm and has personally led the legal team in various aircraft financing transactions throughout the years, from which he has gained immense experience with different types of aircrafts and situations, mostly representing foreign aircraft owners and lessors in structuring the finance and operating lease, preparing the transaction documents, and ensuring the interests of the owners are protected in the aircraft registration. So that's quite a resume. Thank you for joining us today, Kerwin. We're happy to have you.
Good morning to you, Tracy, and thank you for having me. As you can see, it's already nighttime here in this part of the world, and I think I am approximately 14 hours ahead of you.
Yes, it's early morning, 7 a.m. My time. I'm on Central Time in the United States. So yes.
Okay. So anyway, webinars like these are quite fun and relaxed. So even if it's like 7 a.m. your time, it's always a great way for L2B Aviation Law Network to give back to our aviation community. And before I forget, I would like to congratulate you and L2B for achieving an unparalleled feat of more than 10 straight years of being ranked by Chambers as the #1 aviation network of lawyers and law firms. So thank you, Tracy. Let me have this
Thank
opportunity to
you.
thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you. Thank you. We are so happy to have you as a part of our network.
Okay. So I would also like to give a warm welcome to everyone here who is watching now or who may watch in the future. So um, Tracy mentioned, I am Kerwin Tan of Tan Hassani Law, the Philippine member of L2B Network. And today's webinar is on the updated civil aviation fees in the Philippines. So should we begin, Tracy?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, okay, great. So I would say that while the topic seems very specific at first glance, the implications to the consumers are actually quite substantial. Interesting also, this is part of the wider global trend of extraordinary inflation and its effect on the consumer price index. Globally, cost of living has shot up, and part of that actually comes from increase in transportation and logistics costs. And part of that transportation cost also comes from regulators, such as the Civil Aviation Authority in each country and not just the Philippines. So while the topic for today is particular to the Philippines, I suppose that the principles behind it would somehow be the same in other countries' civil aviation. So I'm not sure in other countries if they've also increased the fees. Likely they did. So everywhere it affects the logistics and the transportation costs everywhere. So if the US increases, if Philippines increases, if countries in Europe increases, then every civil aviation authority increases, then all of those impact together the logistics costs on the basic goods and services that consumers would need on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
That's a good point. I mean, aviation is a global industry, right? So, um, increases in one jurisdiction are sure to affect the rest of the world. You know, we did the live stream a few months ago with France and Spain, and you know, Europe is increasing fees on short haul flights that compete with their rail, and that's going to have an effect on travel globally.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. This discussion or webinar today is composed of 5 parts. So part one will just go straight to the point. It's on the civil aviation fees update itself. The discussion covers where the updated fees are applicable, where there are exemptions, and how the formulas are set out to compute the fees. So part one is on the updates themselves. Um, Part two would be a brief comparison on the previous fees. I thought it would be interesting to know what changed over the past decade, mainly because this would be a comparison as to 2011 fees. So that's quite a number of
Mm.
years since then. So I thought it would be interesting to just make a quick comparison. And number three would be preferential fees. So, as mentioned, these fees affect um, the economics of each country's uh, logistics and transport costs. So we do have, at least in the Philippines, we do have preferential fees, and these are specific airports in the Philippines that have preferential fees and based on a unique situation. These are actually government to government agreements. As I will discuss later, these involve like the government of um, Indonesia, the government of Malaysia and the Philippines or Brunei. So these are preferential fees negotiated and finalized on a G2G level.
Yeah.
And the part four would be consequences of failing to pay the fees. This is part of the webinar where I think aircraft lessors and owners would be quite interested to know as it can affect their aircrafts on lease in the Philippines. So part four would be quite interesting for lessors and aircraft owners. And lastly, I take this opportunity to like insert this quite a big update in the Philippines. Um, it would be an update on the just concluded Philippine government bid to upgrade and privatize the Manila International Airport itself. Since the Manila Airport is the most prominent international gateway to the Philippines, we see that the airport fees, not just the civil aviation fees, but the airport fees would also go up. So, because it's now privatized, the Manila Airport has now been privatized.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah. Okay. We'll go straight to part one, which are the updates on civil aviation fees. So here, before I proceed, I will be referring to the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines as the CAAP. We call it the CAAP, or the CAAP. So last year, CAAP issued a memorandum circular which updated the fees it charges for certain services. So I'll walk you guys through what these services are and where they are applicable. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here, the updated fees apply to these aircrafts and what kind of flights, the international flights, the domestic flights, and what we call the Gen Av flights or the general aviation flights. The Gen Av flights, for those who might not know it, the Gen Av flights refer more to the unscheduled flights. These are the air taxi operators. So these are the unscheduled flights versus the scheduled flights. The scheduled flights are what people commonly known as like the airlines. They have scheduled flights. The Gen Av flights are those that are business jets, private jets, private charters, air charters, that sort of things. Those are the GenAv flights. Um, and these fees also apply to those that merely overfly within the Manila FIR. The FIR is the Flight Information Region. So overflight means literally it just goes over the Philippine airspace without even landing. And these fees also apply to those kinds of aircrafts. So it really applies to everything. So again, just for the a brief information of what an FIR is, or the Flight Information Region. The FIR is a specified region of airspace in which the flight information services and alerting services are provided by CAAP. So once an aircraft enters the FIR, certain services are automatically provided by the Civil Aviation Authority of that jurisdiction, such as air traffic management, flight information, alerts, or use of navigation and communication services, and even search and rescue services. So all of these are charged by CAAP.
Can I ask a question real quick? You're saying
Yeah,
they're gonna charge you just to fly in Filipino airspace?
overflights. Yes, correct.
Is that
So long.
normal?
Yes. Let me go to the next slide. So, this is actually the Manila FIR. Um, it is it is actually the ICAO that delegates which country is responsible for the operational control of a particular FIR. So the ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization,
Right.
is the one that says, okay, this is your FIR, this area, this one is yours. So they are the ones that sets the boundaries, so to speak. And here we can see the Manila FIR compared to the others in the region. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On Yeah, and on the next slide, I removed the others, but you can see more clearly the it's a bit, the lines is not that clear, but it's there. That's the Manila FIR. So
Yeah.
that's where basically where the CAAP controls the airspace, basically for air traffic services, for information service. Because every time an aircraft, even if they fly, just overfly it, they would need information, like where are the other aircrafts in the location, what's the altitude, whatnot. So they would need certain services. So these are the services that's provided by CAAP.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, okay, but we do have some exceptions. We do have some exceptions. So first are those that are not so surprising, are those aircrafts that are carrying heads of state, like the presidents, or non-commercial purposes, such as those that provide humanitarian aid. For example, a few years back, uh, a certain area in the Philippines was hit by a very strong typhoon, so they had to fly in humanitarian aid. So I'm sure the Philippine government was more than happy to waive certain CAF fees for that one.
Right.
So, or those that aircrafts that were originally headed to another destination but had to be diverted to the Philippines due to medical emergency. So if they had to suddenly land because there's an onboard medical emergency, they waive those fees for those. So it's these are non-commercial purposes. Okay. Um, Another aircraft type that have certain exceptions is the military aircraft. And but only if they provide what we call reciprocity. So meaning the military aircraft of a certain country would not be charged the CAAP fees, but if the Philippine military aircraft are in that other country, they would also not charge for those fees. So it's based on reciprocity. So there can be exceptions on military aircrafts. Um, Particularly for the US, this is very interesting because the Philippines has a military alliance with the US. And there are regular US military aircrafts flying into and out of the Philippines.
Interesting. I don't know if I knew that.
Okay. So let me go to the next one. Okay, here is a good example. I have two good examples, very recent examples. So in 2022, for the first time ever, the U.S. Air Force brought in fighter aircrafts, the F-22 Raptors. They landed in the Philippines. I think it was like for like goodwill visits, stuff like that, for like training exercises with the Philippine Air Force. So they did. So that does happen. So most likely they were waived the CAAP fees. So that's one example. I have another example which is more controversial actually.
Oh,
This
okay.
happened last year also. Um, so sometime last year, a U.S. transport aircraft suddenly landed unannounced in the Manila airport with no I don't know, they said like, of course it's in the news. They said like with incomplete flight clearance, it suddenly just landed in the Manila airport, a US transport aircraft. So
Wow.
it was such a big deal that a senator in the Philippines even had to like um had a Senate inquiry why that happened.
And did you find out why?
Well, they said
Just
like miscommunication.
okay. And it was a U.S. cargo aircraft?
It was a US cargo aircraft, yes.
Was that military? This says military plane. Military
Yes, but it's
cargo?
a military cargo. Yes.
Okay.
I think it's one of
That's a
those C-130 something, like the big ones. Yeah.
very interesting, but we don't know why they
Yes.
landed.
Well, they said they were not supposed to land in the Manila airport, but in a regional airport. That's the
So
official
they
press
got,
release, at least.
and do we know what the cargo was?
No.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yes. So, see, the topic might not be that interesting at the start, but talking about fees, but there you go. So you have examples of like military aircrafts that are maybe exempted, right? They might be exempted. They're in the list of possible exemptions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whether they intend to land there or not, whether it's an accident or not. Oops, wrong airport.
Yes. Okay. Um. All right. So let's go to the next one. So um this is actually your question on like why is it that even if you do an overflight, so um these operational charges are actually required by ICAO itself. So we're just basically, Philippines is just following ICAO directives. So the services are actually a requirement of the ICAO, the air traffic services, the various navigational and communication facilities. These are all requirements of ICAO. So CAAP does provide those services even if it's an overflight. And the CAAP actually charges based on a per flight basis. So you have your domestic flights, you have your international flights, you have your overflights, all within the Manila FIR. So these are charged on a per flight basis because of these air traffic services that are mandated by ICAO itself.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, the fees are charged on a flight per flight basis. Okay. Okay. Hold on. Okay. I think I'm going to go to the next, which are, yeah, there you go. So now we're going to the formulas. I'm not gonna bore everyone with like too much of a detail on how it's a mathematical computation, its fees. Um, So, but I will just go through it just to show you what's the difference on the fees if it's international versus domestic, and even for training flights, because training flights are quite unique. Okay, so
Mm.
it's basically grouped into three. The formulas are grouped into three. The first is the overflights and the international flights. The second is domestic flights and gen flights, and the last is the training flights. So international flights, just for the reference of everyone, it's basically it originates from outside the Philippines and lands in the Philippines. That's one flight. That's one international flight. Domestic flight is, of course, if it's just within the Philippines. Okay, so we'll go straight to the formulas. Okay, so on the formulas, so the CAAP fees are known as the air navigation charges, so ANC. So they are usually charged in US dollar, but of course they're payable in peso. It does not help right now that the peso versus the dollar is quite weak right now, but at least the airlines have the option whether to pay in dollar or in peso. Um, the important thing to take a look here is that the the major factor here is what we call based on the weight of the aircraft. As you can see, it's based on what we call the MTO, or the maximum takeoff weight. Some would call this the maximum takeoff mass. It's the same. So the MTO is defined by the manufacturer itself. It's not defined by CAAP. It's not defined by AKO. It's defined by the manufacturer itself, like Airbus, Boeing, Textron. It's defined by the manufacturer. So it is defined as the maximum mass at which the aircraft is certified for takeoff due to its structural limitation. So it doesn't really um, affected by external factors like temperature or altitude or runway length or short runway. It doesn't really affect MTO. It's a fixed figure, and it's designated by the manufacturer itself. So here we have the different categories for the MTO, and of course, the higher it is, the more the fees are, basically. Okay.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. So this is for overflights and international flights. Okay. And then, okay, let's go to the next one. Before that, I took the liberty of giving some examples just to, to help visualize what these aircrafts are. And these are more or less the more well-known aircraft. So leading the pack is the gigantic Antonov AN-225, which had 6 engines. It's a
Wow.
transport aircraft. It's huge, and it had 6 engine. I say had because unfortunately the Antonov AN-225, which is the only one existing in the world, was destroyed last 2022 in the Ukraine
Um,
war.
um,
Yeah.
okay.
So there's no more AN-225. It was the only one. So
Oh, wow.
unfortunately, it was destroyed.
Yeah.
The Antonov AN-225 actually landed in the Philippines a few years back to deliver um, a power plant, like a really huge power plant. So they had to like load it up. Imagine the nose going up and then it's going in. It's a power plant, a huge power plant for a power producer here in the Philippines. So they had to deliver it. If I'm not mistaken, um, I forgot which country in Europe, but they had delivered it from Europe all the way to the Philippines. So they commissioned that as
Wow.
the delivery aircraft.
Wow, that's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So the next one is also the gigantic Airbus A330, A380, sorry, A380. So and the last in that category is the Boeing 747, but I don't think there's not a lot of air operators flying the 747. For Airbus A380, there are still operators using that, like Singapore Airlines, um, I think Emirates, Qantas. So I think they still operate the A380. But in that category, the highest one, more than 400 tons, there's not a lot of aircraft within that range, at
Yep.
least in the civil aviation side. Okay.
Right. Okay.
And on the next level would be the Lockheed C5 Galaxy. That could be used like for military transport aircraft. The C5 is used for military aircraft. And then we have the Boeing 777. I think that's still fairly popular right now. and the Airbus A350. So that's in the next range for the MTOW. And sort of in the middle are the Dreamliner, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and the Airbus A330. So
Mm.
those are sort of in the middle in terms of like the MTOW. I just put in also the Concorde. Of course, there's no Concorde right now, but I just put it there
Yep.
for like, so for those who still know what the Concorde was.
My
And
grandmother flew
then
on the My grandmother flew on the Concorde. It was back in the
oh,
80s,
okay.
right? Yeah,
Yes, yes.
London to Paris, and I can't remember how long, but it was a big deal.
Yes, it was a big deal, definitely. So yeah, Concorde over there, sort of in the middle. Yeah.
They're trying to bring
Um,
back some of those high speed Mach, aircraft, but or they were maybe prior to COVID. I don't know if they're still working
mm.
on that, but yeah, I remember the Concorde. I'm old enough.
Okay. And then sort of down below are the more, I would say, like more common aircraft. At least in this part of the world, there are the Airbus A320s, the Bombardier Q400, the ATRs. So those are the more, I would say, like the regional kind of aircrafts.
Right, right.
And the lowest in the pack are the business jets, like
Mm.
Learjet, the Cessna Citations. So those are like in the lowest range, right? So just to give like everyone good understanding of what exactly MTOW means and what kind of aircraft falls under which category.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll go to the next formula. This one is for the domestic and GenAv. So the formula is the same. The only difference is instead of $1.30 in the formula, this one is 65 cents. That's the only difference. Everything else is
Um,
still the same. Um, and in the Philippines, at least, I do not think there is any domestic carrier flying an A380 or a Boeing 747. So there won't be any aircraft in the highest two categories. So in the Philippines, at least, it would be much cheaper for the air navigation charges because most of them would fall within the lower range of the MTOW. Okay, and then training flights. Okay. This one is a bit interesting. So, within the Southeast Asian region, the Philippines is actually quite a popular destination for those looking to be a pilot. Because comparatively, the Philippines is quite a cost effective jurisdiction compared with other flying schools in the region. So, we actually have a fair bit of foreigners studying in our flying schools in the Philippines. And even my firm right now, we are assisting our flying school clients having this memorandum of understanding or like a partnership sort of with their counterparts in Malaysia, in Indonesia, so that those in Malaysia can bring their students to the Philippines to do the actual flying portion of the study. So, as I mentioned, the charges of CAAP is based on per flight, right? But if you think about it, flying schools are not have a lot of flights because that's how they learn. So a flight plan for flying school means um, a takeoff or a landing at the same airport, but with two main difference. The first is what we call the touch and go, and the other is the expanded touch and go. So touch and go means that the aircraft lands, touches the runway, and then takes off immediately again. So that's a touch and go. So it lands. So I guess the instructor is like teaching the student how to land, touches the runway, and immediately flies back again. The expanded touch and go means that the aircraft lands, immediately vacates the runway. It has to vacate the runway, park it for a bit, and then the pilot would signal the air traffic service that it will not stop for more than 15 minutes, and they don't have any intention of going outside the plane, and it will not turn off the engine. So that's expanded touch and go, meaning it will land, stop for a bit, not more than 15 minutes, and then fly out again.
Okay.
Again, because they're training pilots, right? So um, for touch and go, for computing the fees, they are allowed 4 touch and goes. So even that's still considered one fee. So even if you landed 4 times, that's still counted as one. That will be charged as one. And for expanded touch and go, they can do that twice for one fee. Okay.
Per day or per?
Per, I guess per, because if it's touch and go, then they land, they touch, they fly again, they circle, they land, they touch, they circle
Okay.
again. So yeah,
Okay. So per flight, basically, they're going to call
per
that
flight.
one flight. Okay.
They're gonna call that one flight. Yes, correct.
Okay. Okay.
So as you can see on the screen, there's a base computation for that. It's now in
Mm,
peso because it's a flying school, but I'm just giving like what's the equivalent in US dollar. So that's the equivalent in US dollar at today's exchange rate. For a touch and go, which includes up to 4, right? So there's a sample computation there. I'm not gonna go too much into detail, but basically one flight plan is 4 touch and go. So you can like do 4 turns, and you'll be
right.
charged just once. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. So in the slide right now, there's 2 more difference with flight training flights. So there are airports with air traffic services, and there are airports without air traffic services. These are really small airports in the Philippines. So we have really small airports that are not busy at all. Like, but it's an airport, it's an actual airport, but it's not it's not within a heavily commercialized area that a lot of flights are coming in, flying out. So there are actually airports with no traffic services. So these are these are the fees. If you notice, it's cheaper. So
Mm,
if a flying school decides to do their training at an airport without air traffic services, then it's cheaper. So there's this distinction there.
yeah, that makes sense, though.
Okay. All
I
right.
would think that a lot of flight schools would want to choose that option.
Yes. I'm just thinking like, how far away are those airports?
Uh,
Uh,
yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
only thing that I'm thinking of. Because if there's no air traffic service in that particular airport, it is actually the responsibility of the pilot for filing the flight plan in that airport, as well as advising the nearest airport with air traffic services. So
Oh,
that those two
okay.
airports, the one the nearest, would also know what's happening in that other airport with no traffic services.
Mm, okay.
Yeah. All right. So,
So it might be cheaper, but it's more work and likely more responsibility for the air school or the
yeah,
instructors, right? The flight school.
yes, definitely. Okay. So those are like the fees and how they're computed. Now, I'm going to go straight to part 2 now. Just so what I discuss is quite fresh in everyone's mind. This one is now going to part 2, which is a very quick comparison of what happened 10 years ago in 2011 versus now 2023 in terms of the fees, in terms of the CAAP fees. Okay. So there are actually 2 very interesting differences since 10 years have passed. One has
Mm,
something to do with technology, and the other has something to do with market trend. Okay. So as to the operational charges, again, these are required by ICAO. They have been required by ICAO even before. So these are ICAO standards. Okay. So
mhm.
the first distinction I mentioned about having something to do with technology. So if you recall, put yourself back 10 years ago in 2011, right? So the fees here are still the same. Navigational charges, air traffic services, CAAP has been charging them since even 10 years ago because they're required by AKO. But the difference here is that there is one fee that they charged before that they are not charging right now. And these are what we call the Class B messages or aeronautical fixed services. So a Class B message is a charge for transmission of Class B messages passing through this communication center to a foreign country. Okay. So a telecommunication charge of 50 pesos at the time, it's about maybe a dollar. It's about a dollar for each line of 69 characters. So Tracy, you mentioned a while ago that um, you still remember the old days, right? So here's here's
Conquest.
here's a fun. Okay, here's a fun fact for you. So if you were mature enough to have a mobile phone in the late 90s, if you recall those mobile phones in the late 90s or to the early 2000s, you would remember that sending SMS or text messages using one of the phones have a limitation on the number of characters. Unlike right now, right? It's all chat, right? But before, if you recall, an SMS had a certain number of lines per text. And per text, it's charged about like 50 pesos or like a dollar. So I'm going to show you a slide that may jog sort of your memory.
Oh.
So if you recall, these are the phones way back in the early 2000s or late 1990s. And these are where the original SMS or short message system or text message. And these phones had a limitation per text of I don't really recall exactly. It's about like 49 or 50 characters, something like that. So if you go back I'll go back to the earlier slide. If you go back here, because the technology back then isn't as unlimited as right now in terms of like messaging someone, right? So back then they had a charge for every message that they sent out.
Wow.
So
I remember the phones even before that. They didn't
yeah,
have text messages. They were huge blocks. They were just
yeah.
massive. I had my first cell phone in the early 90s. We didn't even have cell phone, I mean text communication. But yeah. Um that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the first difference. It's the technology because before,
Mhm. Mhm.
these phones are not connected to the internet. They're what we call in the technology back then is called GSM. They're not 4G, they're not 3G, they're not 5G. It's called GSM, and you can send text messages, but they're not internet based.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that's the reason why before CAP had to charge for like messages. Okay. So the next one is the difference is on the MTO. Okay. I'm just making a comparison here. On the left side is the 2023, which is the present fees based on. In 2011, as you can see, we didn't have back then like more than 400 tons because it's not as prevalent back then to have an aircraft that big, right? Although you at the time you already have the Antonov, but again, it's a very unique aircraft. It's just one of
Right.
one in the whole world, and I don't think we had the Airbus A380 back then, so there wasn't really a need to have a different, separate category for 300 to 400 and then more than 400. So there wasn't much of a need back then to make the distinction. So
Mm.
as you can see, the difference here is that on the MTO, that's the second distinction between the fees back then, more than a decade ago, and the fees right now.
Aircrafts have gotten bigger and heavier.
Yes, correct. Yes,
We've modified them to carry more.
yes. Definitely, the A380 is like a really huge aircraft.
Right.
It's civil aircraft. It's for passengers and cargo.
Right.
Okay. All right. So let's go to part three. So this is what I mentioned a while ago about the G2G or the government to government deals for certain preferential rates on certain airports and CAAP fees. Um, okay. So in the Philippines, we have this very particular um, G2G fee structure. It's called the BIMP. We call it the BIMP AAGA, or the Brunei Darussalam Indonesia Malaysia Philippines East Asian Growth Area. So I guess it is a treaty of sort, because it's G2G. What this seeks to promote is really a more cheaper way to promote cross-border flow of goods and people between these countries, and to increase trade, tourism, and investment. As I mentioned, it really affects consumer price index. The air transport fees affects consumer price index and cost to the to go to each country, right? So, but this only applied to alternate international airports. So it doesn't apply to the whole of the Philippines. These are the airports that they sought to promote from an investment and tourism point of view. We have four airports. The first three of them are in the southern part of the Philippines, and the Lawag is in the northern part of the Philippines. And the discount can be as high as 50%. So it's quite big, especially if these airlines would tack on the CAAP fees and the airport fees to the plane ticket, right? So 50% discount from regular fees is quite substantial.
That is substantial. That's a big, but that's good. I mean, if that's what you're trying to do is promote uh, growth and tourism into those areas, it makes sense to discount the fees. So that's good. Is it
Yeah.
working? Can you tell? Is it working?
I'm not sure, but I suppose so. I suppose so because Davao is really a big airport right now, compared to like 2011. Davao is a really big international airport right now, so I guess it did promote Davao as an alternate airport rather than landing at Manila and then taking a domestic flight to Davao. It did promote
Yeah.
Davao. That definitely yes. And I think there are now direct flights even from Davao to Singapore, for example, or Davao
Oh,
to,
wow.
yes. So definitely it did. So to just give you a visualization, it might just be a bit small, but the circles there, I encircled four in the Philippine side. That the top one is Lawag. Davao, the one I'm saying, is like the lowest one, and then we have Zamboanga and Puerto Princesa, which is in Palawan. So these are the four airports that fly between Indonesia, Brunei, and Malaysia, those three countries.
Yeah.
So these are the what we call the BIMP AAGA East Asia Growth Region, which they seek to promote in terms of trade and tourism.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay. Oh, since you mentioned if it's working, right now we're assisting uh, an air a small airline to promote a specific flight between Davao and this particular area in Indonesia called Manado. So Indonesia is very popular in terms of like its beaches and other tourist destinations, but mostly these are concentrated in the popular areas like Bali, right? Bali is a very popular area in Indonesia, so they want to promote other areas in Indonesia. One is called Manado. It's an area in Indonesia. It's very beautiful also. So we're trying to promote and see how that works. So right now our firm is assisting an a small airline to try to develop flights between Davao and Manado in Indonesia. So that's an example of how it works.
Very good.
Yeah. All right. So that's for part three on just showing how exceptions can be carved out from the general rule if there's like a G2G government to government agreement. So that's one example of how this can be done. Right. So we'll proceed to part four. So
Mm.
part four is consequences of unpaid fees. Of course, you've got planes flying in, flying out, incurring all of these costs, all of these fees. And so, what happens exactly if they're not paid, right? So, and this is very important for aircraft lessors, aircraft owners, because if you're leasing an aircraft and then and the airline doesn't pay the fees, then what happens? Are you affected or not? So this part is quite interesting for lessors. So let's go
Okay.
one by one. So the first is, just like any other service provider, um, if not only provides air traffic services, but it is the foremost regulatory agency in the Philippines for aviation matters. We get various services from CAAP, such as not just air traffic services, but aircraft registration, airworthiness registration, deregistration, and a host of other services. So if you have unpaid dues, it can happen that you are suspended from getting more services from CAAP. And how they actually do this is, when you go to CAAP for certain services, there are certain services which they will ask you to get an accounting clearance. They call it an accounting clearance. So they will know if you've got unpaid fees. And before you are allowed to, let's say you're applying for a certificate of registration for a new aircraft, like let's say you're an airline, right? Or this particular aircraft, you need to renew its airworthiness certificate. So before CAAP actually does that, if you don't pass their accounting clearance, you have to clear your accounts first, meaning you have to pay before
Hmm.
they provide more services for you. So that's one, suspension of services. And then the next one is rejection of flight plans, or the use of CAA facilities and services. So if an operator has accumulated enough unpaid fees, it might find itself unable to operate because, as I mentioned, CAAP is the foremost regulator in the Philippines for aviation. So if you're not paying your fees, they might reject your flight plan or basically deny the use of any other CAAP facilities and services.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the third one is the one that's most interesting to aircraft lessors or owners that are, on lease to Philippine operators. So while legally the aircraft is not owned by the defaulting operator, uh, CAAP can still put a lien, and that would be a huge headache for the aircraft owner. So to remove the lien would be an added burden on the lessor, on the owner, right? Even if the owner didn't have anything to do with unpaid fees, right? But at the end of the day, that's your asset, right? And if there's a lien there, it's in your interest to remove the lien, because CAAP under this regulation can put liens on the operator's assets, including the aircraft. So where this is of particular practical importance to lessors is that, for example, the lessor wants to repossess the aircraft, for example, but if you want to repossess the aircraft, it means you have to deregister the aircraft. If you want to deregister the aircraft, that's a CAAP service. And the CAAP won't provide that service because you've got unpaid dues on that aircraft that is tied to the operator. So this is quite concerning to aircraft owners or lessors.
So, do those liens um, take priority over any existing leases or loans, or are they just kind of a blip or a cloud on the title?
Um, it doesn't it This is a special law, so I have to go to a general law in the Philippines about liens by government agencies. So there are like taxes. Taxes is a lien. If you have
Right,
unpaid taxes, which is like this one, that is due to the government, then it can take precedent over, you know, leases. So yes, it
right.
can take precedent over leases.
Can they? I mean, they probably can't and don't want to repossess based on that lien, but they can hold back services, right, until the lien gets cleared.
Hmm.
I'm just
So
thinking about how you would execute on a lien like that, and I guess they just hold the plane.
yes, it's possible that they can hold the plane. Yes.
Okay.
So it depending on the amount, of course, and a cost benefit analysis. The lessor might just say like, I'm just gonna pay the unpaid dues, right? Just to be able to get back the aircraft, because cost benefit analysis, you have got the aircraft there grounded, right? You'd rather take back the aircraft and just pay the dues.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. And then the last remedy for the CAAP is basically just other general civil remedies, like filing a court case for collection of the fees. So those are the basic general civil remedies. But to be fair, I have not heard, at least in the near recent times, of CAAP actually imposing liens on the aircraft. Yeah, but it's just there. It does part. It's part of their powers to do so if they want to.
Are they having to enforce a lot of enforcement actions for not paying fees? Is this a
Not
real
that I
issue?
know of. No, not really. Not really. Not
Well,
really.
that's good.
Yeah. Um, Okay, I will now go to the last part of this webinar. It's not something to do with the fees, with the CAAP fees, but it's just taking this opportunity to update everyone of the very recent update on the Manila International Airport situation. So this is actually a significant event in Philippine aviation history, because Manila International Airport has been for decades unsuccessfully bidded out by the Philippine government for privatization, and it started way back in the mid 1990s. So that's like 3 decades ago that they've been trying to like privatize this for like 3 decades now, 30 years. So finally, just a few weeks ago, the Philippine government did successfully bid out to a consortium led by a big conglomerate in the Philippines in partnership with the Incheon Airport of South Korea. So that joint venture won the bid to privatize the Manila International Airport. So, in relation to our talk today about the air traffic services fees going up, we do see that the airport side fees will also significantly increase because of the privatization. So, from a consumer perspective, you're hit twice: airport fees and air navigation fees.
Mm.
So, but you know, so it just affects the overall cost to move people and also goods. So it does not really help that extraordinary inflation is everywhere right now, and it's just a bit bad timing in terms of fees going up. But it is what it is. So it's just for everyone to be aware that fees, air services are going up, will definitely go up.
I think that
And
anybody who travels is seeing that. I'm seeing that.
mhm, mhm. So and the to rehabilitate Manila Airport, it requires $3.1 billion. So definitely a cost of that would be passed on to consumers for sure, right? And the project will cover all facilities of the airport: runway upgrades, terminal upgrades, and of course associated facilities upgrade. So yes, while it does improve the overall passenger experience, for sure there would be a cost component to that one, which will ultimately pass um, to the passengers.
Sure. Always.
So yeah, I mean that's the end of my discussion. I would like to thank everyone who tuned in or who would be watching this video in the future. And again, Tracy, thank you for having me again for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you. That was really fascinating. That was really interesting. I appreciate your insight and your perspectives. I do. I think travel costs across the board are going up. Well, like you said, everything's getting more expensive right now. So, but thank you all very much for joining us. And If you are interested in learning more about Kerwin or his law firm, you can visit our website, l2baviation.com. Location, we have a locations tab, and you can go to the Philippines, and all of his information is there. You can also learn more about L2B Aviation. We are a network of nearly 50 law firms that specialize in aviation, and we are representing close to 59 countries around the globe at this point. So we have quite an international presence. All of our members are carefully selected from the lending specialist aviation law firms in their jurisdiction, and we only have one firm per jurisdiction. So if you ever have need of an aviation attorney in a foreign jurisdiction, look to our website, l2baviation.com. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.